We made it!
Let's hear it for technology.
Woohoo!
Yeah, so of course everyone is going to be tuning in 6 minutes, but we're going to go ahead and get started since we are together, and we're going to talk a little bit about culture, the history of house, of course, and um, a little bit about legacy.
Yes.
And we are the Vintage House Show. Thanks for tuning in on another Wednesday night with the Vintage House crew and tonight's special guest, Eric E-smoove Miller.
Yes, yes,
Yay!
y'all.
He's
Yes, yes,
almost
y'all.
always a part of every Vintage House Show anyway, with his commentary, with the quotes, the reference to the phrase that has been coined, the sonic canon. And he is indeed a pioneer and key contributor to the house music movement. And you'll hear a lot more about his contributions and his voice in our house culture. But just as a reminder, everyone, you're tuned into the Vintage House Show, which is normally aired on, well, I shouldn't say normally anymore. I think I need to strike that line
New normal.
because we're living in a new normal. But in the
Yes.
past, we broadcast from the studios of WNUR on the campus of Northwestern University, 89.3 on your FM dial. But for the last 6 months, we've been broadcasting from our homes. This is therefore the at-home edition of Vintage House.
Right?
Facebook Live, Twitch, and YouTube is where you can tune in and tell your friends to tune in. All the house aficionados should really have their calendars marked and their timer set for 9 p.m. every Wednesday night. And we are powered by the Modern Dance Music Research and Archiving Foundation. We are the premier on-air podcast and video blog or vlog or live stream show dedicated to illuminating and preserving the lives, music, and careers and history of house music pioneers such as E-smoove, pointing over there to him. And just for further edification, the Dance Music Research and Archiving Foundation is the only repository in the United States of America dedicated solely to the study, preservation, and celebration of the genres of house and dance music. Our mission, short, simple, and vital, is to preserve the memories, the memorabilia, the stories that support the ownership and the sustainability of the culture of house music right here in Chicago. Again, tonight's guest is Eric E-smoove Miller.
Yes, sir.
Good to see you. Good to have you. We are longtime friends. I basically have known this guy most of my adult life. I mean, most of my entire life, rather.
Right. St. Clotilde. St.
Yeah,
Clotilde,
we
right.
attended grade school together. And, both found ourselves in the house culture, which was a great way to reconnect. So I have a lot of love, appreciation, and respect for this man. And of course, joining me from the Vintage House crew is one of the founders of the Dance Music Research and Archiving Foundation, certainly the founder of the Vintage House Show. I call her the super duper producer, my friend and colleague and co-host, Lauren Lowery. Come on off mute for a second and talk.
Well, I've got the Mexican parade on the outside of my house, and you're going to hear all of that noise very shortly, so I was muting myself. But you know what, guys? As we jump right in, I would like to hear a little bit. You all have known each other all your lives. You mentioned Saint Clotilde. People don't know what that is. Give us some background on how you all met and how long it's been.
Well, I wouldn't say we met. We ended up in the same place in space because our family saw the value of getting this Catholic school education on the south side of Chicago in the mighty community of Chatham. Chatham represent those tuned in. And Eric is, he's got the advantage in that he's a few years younger than me. And what we did was, that school definitely was an intimate, small setting. And so families and students of those who attended you couldn't help but to be connected and to know people back in the 70s.
Absolutely. Well, I'd like to add to our graduating class had a unique opportunity to have Herb Kent DJ our eighth grade graduation.
Get out of here.
And in that time, songs like Martin Skid and Rock Lobster and all of that was played. And one of our part of our trip, eighth grade trip, was going to imports, etc. And that's
What?
where I was able to actually to buy our first 12-inch for connection to.
So you're coming in and out on your audio. I'm not sure if it's on my end or if that's the effect everyone is having, but I think you were describing the imports, etc. field trip that was part of your eighth grade graduation celebration, and it was your sort of foray or introduction into some of the dance music culture. Is that what I heard correctly?
Uh-oh. We can't hear you, E-smoove. You working it out?
All right, I'm back.
Yes, you're back.
Very good.
My apologies. I wish I could be on the computer, but I had a cell phone.
No, we're honored to have you, and I'm very appreciative. We've been working very hard to make this happen, and so I know carving out the time to do it is major. And Latanza says, "Hey," of course, she's tuned in. She says, "Hey, babe," with a big heart, of course. And we're also being watched by folks like Reggie Davenport, DJ Purple, and R.A. Liddell tuned in.
It's my buddy Rasan. What up, Rasan?
So it's going to be a good night. Eric is a very insightful member of the house music community. And for those who were trying to understand a little more about St. Clotilde, this was a Catholic elementary school in the heart of Chatham in Chicago. And I think there were those who are also asking if Eric went to Lindblom for a minute.
He did go to Lindblom. We're very, very upset that we lost him to Mendel, but he had a really good story about his time at Lindblom, and I look forward to having him jump back on the screen. Because so many of us, like, you know how you see people and you don't realize that you haven't seen them again. I thought the E-smoove was always at Lindblom. Like, I'm like, he graduated from Lindblom. He's like, no, I graduated from Mendel. Like, how did that happen? Like, I don't even know where'd you go? You know, so that was crazy. E-smoove, you back?
He is the mighty monarch, man. And I guess he'll be able to elaborate a little bit more
Sorry,
about
so
the
sorry.
time at Lindblom.
So E-smoove, can you hear us?
My apologies. I'm trying to see if I can connect to Wi-Fi if that would give us a better signal.
Okay, well, while you're working on that connection, we're telling your story, basically. You know, you are having been at St. Clotilde, graduating from there and going on to Lindblom, and from Lindblom to Mendo. Obviously, two schools with very important roles in the history of house music. As you know, you weren't the only one pioneering the genre from those two important venues or high schools. Can you talk to us a little bit about?
He's gone.
Oh,
I could tell he was frozen. I was like, yeah, he's frozen down there.
yeah.
He was perfectly fine before the broadcast, and now it's like can't hear a thing. That's crazy. But yeah, it was so interesting that you know, I only know him from Lindblom, so I didn't even recognize he left. So yeah, the story of how he ended up from one to the other and when he left was a very interesting one. So I look forward to him telling us that story if he can jump back on, see what happens. And so you all have this whole Catholic school thing. So the Catholic school people, they just go from grammar school to high school to colleges. I know some friends went to Trinity from, you know, then went to Loyola. I mean, were you encouraged to do that whole, I mean, I wonder if were you encouraged to stay your whole track into the Catholic system, Kevin? Or, you know, what made you jump to U of I when it looks like so many people were sort of driven to DePaul or driven to Loyola in these places?
Yeah, nah, not so much. You know what's interesting? I self-selected at the high school level. I was certainly considering St. Ignatius and St. Willibrord, but ended up at St. Francis de Sales. I think Percy L. Julian was the other school option. Shout out to my buddy Jeff Burt, who went through the Julian route, and
Shout out to my sister who went the Julian route. Love for Valerie Lowery. She was the first graduating class. I think it was class in 1979.
that is so cool. Yeah, Julian gave birth to one of the hottest cliques of the house era as well. Just Us. There were a lot of
Yeah.
people from the Just Us crew, from Percy L. Julian, Kim Bishop, and Kim Jones, and I think Jasper Brewster and some other folks. And by the time, you know, the college choice came around, there was a much slimmer set of options for Catholic schools at the collegiate level. But I had it anyway at that point and needed to get to a public institution. And so Illinois was my choice for college.
Got it. Well, that's interesting. So did Just Us, I remember some interesting things about sort of high school, the groups. I feel like I used to see like graffiti art with their names on it. Am I wrong in that? I know that this group out of Lindblom called Nasty Boys used to write Nasty Boys over on all kinds of buildings. And so graffiti was sort of a flow, but it wasn't as intricate, I think, and as detailed and as colorful as maybe some other places in the country. But for some reason, I remember there being a lot of sort of graffiti with the names of these you know, dance crews and just super groups that used to have parties and stuff. I mean, I could be losing my mind, but did you see any graffiti art? Do you recall anything like that happening?
I do around the Pullman area, the London townhouses, and over near Mendel a bit. There was a viaduct that divided Mendo from Gately Stadium, and that viaduct, for some reason, sticks out in my head as one of those areas where groups might have been tagging their presence.
I know. I just was like, I don't know why. I know Nasty Boys did it, but I was like, I remember they did it because I think everyone else did it. But we don't have a lot of memory of that. Like what we don't have. Oh, hey, Rod knows that. Yeah. Because he was a nasty boy. I think that I used to, it's just I used to see them, and then all of a sudden I would see people who I knew, graffitiing things. And now, again, there's a museum of graffiti art. There are exhibits and different, things honoring these, these artists. But in Chicago, I don't think we didn't respect that much as an art. I guess no one else did, but we didn't have a lot of pictures of those. And if someone has a lot of those pictures, the Dance Music Foundation is all about archiving. We just want to make sure that all of these great pioneers have the record of how they contributed to the music genre. And it would be great to have, if someone actually took pictures of that graffiti art, send it over. We'd love to preserve it. We'd love to honor it with some kind of digital exhibition, something like that. So, I'd love to see some of that. If whoever did it, whoever were the graffiti artists, they should pop in and give us the detail on that.
Eric is back with us. Eric, do you have recollection of graffiti art and some of the graphics that some of the high school cliques and groups were involved in? We just heard from Larry Tucker, who talked about the Lusters, aka the Lust Boys. You remember that? And do you have
I
any?
definitely remember the Lusters.
And do you have any evidence, any artifacts from that era?
No. And funny enough, I did used to keep a lot of that stuff, a lot of the flyers and posters. Um, and when we moved from 78th and Euclid, uh, the building that my family had, a lot of that stuff got thrown away, unfortunately. I didn't have the foresight to know that Lauren would be, doing the archiving that she does, or I certainly would have kept it.
And Lauren, can you talk a little bit about the DMRA Foundation mission? And, go ahead and plug it, because, again, the show is powered by the Dance Music Research and Archiving Foundation.
Well, I'm so happy to have Eric back. I think I want to go right to the Eric. But the Dance Music Foundation is really a collaborative effort. We need everyone's effort. We partner with all kinds of groups throughout the city to really preserve the history of house music and celebrate it. We just want this information for the future. We want physical artifacts, memorabilia. Hopefully, sometime in 2021, we can have everyone up to our repository at the award-winning Shorefront Legacy Center in Evanston, Illinois. And we'd love to have you all there to see some of the things that we have from Robert Williams, from Lori Branch, from so many other great artists. So we would love to have you all there. Oh, wow. So Ryle Liddell was having dance battles and other crews. I didn't know you could dance at all, Rasan. So that's interesting. That's good info. Man, how is E-smoove having all these issues today?
Yep. Well, Wi-Fi, they're young people trying to get their remote learning on at the same time as we're hosting tonight's episode of Vintage House. So that bandwidth is a beast. But, we're going to get them plugged in as we can and continue the conversation. There is a rich set of contributions that E-smoove has made, and I wanted to get more from him about that experience he had at Imports, Etc., which was 711 South Plymouth Court in its heyday, South Loop, there behind what is today Jones Commercial. I'm sorry, Jones College Prep is what it's called today. I'm dating myself calling it Jones Commercial because that's what it was in the day. But I'm wondering what that experience was for him there, and how his transition from Lindblom to Mendo occurred, and what gave way from there. And so we'll get him back on when we can to talk about that. But also, what Eric promised to provide some insight on tonight, or some thoughts, was around what's happening in pop culture today. So one of the recent news cycle headlines was that of the demise of the
Hey, Tiana,
relationship between, yep,
can you give me the Wi-Fi?
between Offset and Cardi B. Now, Cardi B and Offset are both hip hop royalty. And so the question was, where are the Cardi B's and Offsets in the house community? You know, the fact that they're romantic decoupling, or whatever they call it these days.
The rap conscious uncoupling.
The rap unconscious uncoupling.
Yeah.
The fact that it made, the major news cycle. There's obviously a lot of celebrity worship out there in the marketplace, and I'm just curious about what the celebrity dimensions are for the house community.
I think, and that's the whole thing. I think in the EDM culture, it was great to have. To me, this month is about family. So first we talked amongst ourselves, and then had Louis on, and then had VD Girl on, now Eric on. So basically our family members, as we sort of think about the future of house music. I think you have to have sort of that young blood and those new, unique controversies and partnerings and, collaborations to make this sort of genre move forward. But hip hop and rap get all the publicity these days. Again, it was national news. They had broken up before, if I'm not mistaken, before she had the major chapters. And this made, all of a sudden, they popped it on the news. They're getting divorced. I was like, didn't they get divorced before and they got back together? Why is this news again? They could do that again. But it's great to have those young people infuse some, interesting, sort of, even if it's ridiculous, unique stories to the music genre. So it's really crazy.
It is. And so Reggie shares a story with us about his E-smoove story, I guess we'll call it, and that he had a copy of the E-smoove remix of You Want This by Janet Jackson, and because he was obviously appreciative of the mastery of that mix, he was able to get another copy, brought it to E-smoove, who autographed it. And I'm not clear, Reggie, whether or not he autographed it while in Cambridge, UK, or that's just where you happen to be able to pick up another copy of the Janet Jackson You Want This E-smoove remix. So get back to
I love the European sort of, these things were happening in Europe. And then, overseas where, music is coming back and forth. It's great to have the perspective of, what you were able to find over in the UK and what you're able to, how that compares to what you would be able to pick up at Imports, Etc. in Chicago. Because clearly some of those imports really were imported from, overseas as well.
They were. I mean, they had buyers for import records and buyers for the domestic releases, and certainly Euro disco was a phenomenon very early on that drove a lot of sales for imports, etc. That dominated some of the earlier WBMX Hot Mix 5 remixes, and eventually um, gave way to the Chicago house sound, which, as we've discussed a lot on this show, was a uh, integration of many of these sounds, everything from gospel and jazz and R&B to Euro disco, soulful disco. These were the melting pot genres that lent themselves very well to creating house music.
I think that a great show would be, and again, sorry, they've got like serious fireworks on my outside right now. But a great show would be really just bringing back all the imports guys and bringing back, I think the Chicago Black Social Culture Map will have a radio, a record shop sort of event next time. But it'd be great just to get all the alums from imports are so vast. And it's amazing how so many of the people from imports became our major superstars, right? From Chippy to all these other people who work there. I'm just amazed. Did you ever go to imports?
Did I ever go to? So the short answer is yes. A more in-depth answer is that for those of you who may know my music handle as Mega, my the way I got that name was because I was at Imports and the Donna Summer remix of I Feel Love had just hit, and it was because it was at Imports, etc. The only version that was immediately available was an import copy of it, and it was entitled The Mega Mix. And I literally elbowed someone to grab that copy of I Feel Love, and I became dubbed Mega Mix. And it kind of flowed with my name, Kevin Mega Mix McFall, when I was on the decks during my days at U of I and on the East Coast, and I shortened it to Mega. But that record, the Donna Summer Mega Mix of I Feel Love, is how I got my name.
Very cool. E-smoove, are you there?
I'm back. Trying to access
Hey,
my
let's
5G. Where's my 5G?
Right, so it's nationwide. But we're
uh,
glad to have you back. So we were telling a bunch of stories. Reggie Davenport talked about you signing, autographing Janet Jackson, If You Want This remix for him, a moment that he
Hmm.
clearly remembers and appreciates. Tell us about your imports, etc. story, if you wanted to elaborate a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, that was an amazing opportunity. So we had heard about it through the Hurricane show. It was advertised all the time. And in my mind, I think I was probably 13 at the time, and pictured this, I don't know, this amazing palace of music. And then we pull up there, and it's actually a garage, a parking garage, and you enter into the parking garage, and it's everything that a parking garage would be, with cars and trucks and what have you, and then you enter this very small space. I would say this was 400 square feet, if that, um, and you enter, and it was a very narrow kind of customer area, and then there was a counter, and then there behind the counter was racks of records, in kind of their individual buy. And unlike most of the record stores I've been to before, like Rhodes Records or Rose Records, I'm sorry, or any of those stores, Metro Music, what have you. This record store, you actually had to know the name of what you were looking for. So it was a very unique experience. And, it was probably J. Poole, then record store. Um, just that experience of being able to go in there and ask for those records that we heard on Herb Kent show was just, amazing. And the guys behind the counter, Brett and the names just escaped me. Frank
Stacy
Sales,
and
um,
Paul.
and I'm sure the owner of the store was there as well. Um, yes, absolutely.
And so you went there as part of
And
your eighth grade trip?
just being able to get those 12 inches, it was just, yes, we requested it as a class,
Oh,
and that's
wow.
how much influence that the Herb Kent show had on us as a class. When you go when you go back to the culture of it, I found out recently from Wayne Williams um, that he was the one that was feeding those records to Herb, and that was based on his experience of going to the clubs like the Exit and those Northside clubs. Um, it's interesting how it's all connected.
There is a connectedness and a web of influence that, again, that's why we give, um, uh, acknowledgments of those of you who have helped to pioneer the genre, right? Because of that connectedness. So you graduated from Chatham's finest, St. Clotilde, although the Neil and Dixon kids would challenge that, and you went on to Limblom.
Yeah, I had a semester at Limblom, which was another life-changing opportunity. I not doing that well in my first year, and I think my father's uh, desire not to pay, no diss to him, but I had lost my scholarship. I was on a scholarship, and decided I didn't want to run for money. This crazy teenage stuff, right?
Yes, of course.
And so his answer was, well, you can go to Lindblom, where my aunt was a teacher. Um, and it was the best thing that happened to me in life. Like, I had found my people. Um, so in that process, I became friends with Eric E.T. Taylor, who was a senior, um, and also Angie Hurley, who was in the same grade as me as a sophomore. Um, and so I spent probably more time outside the school than I did inside the school. But with that, I spent time. This mess is killing me right now. With that, I spent time hanging out with older kids who were then participating in things like going to other schools and passing out flyers and that sort of thing. So I really got a more in depth view of the culture. And as a parent, I know how ridiculous, but um, my experience, it was key to the path that I was on, the trajectory that I was on. So I learned party promotion during that time. I learned how record pools work during that time. I learned um, about hanging posters and picking up the posters. Where do you get the posters from? So somehow in that process, I was available when I should have been in school, obviously. But I'm hanging out with these college kids and whatnot. So it was the gifted curse that semester. But I did so bad there that promptly my mother was like, back to the Catholic school you go, where they can keep track of
Yeah,
you.
there was definitely perceived to be at least some additional structure, and you had to take theology and all those things. So Mendo Catholic, the home of the mighty Monarchs, I was the only one on my block that didn't go to Mendo, but I was embraced as one of them. Great school, and certainly a great legacy in the formation of the culture and the movement of house. Want
Yeah, I
to
mean, it definitely.
talk about that?
I mean, definitely the serendipity of it, if you will, that um, that was also my launch pad in the sense of when I connected, my cousin Dewey B, DJ Dewey B. We both kind of got pulled into the DJ thing together. Um, so, and then we connected with other DJs at Mendel and kind of formed a group that then was allowed to DJ parties. So we would DJ after the games and some of the odd parties that weren't controlled by wall-to-wall sounds
Kirk
and
Townsend and
Kirk
company.
Townsend. Well, Kirk Townsend was involved in getting us in those parties too. Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. But we were the DJ, the student DJ team, so to speak.
What was the
So
name
our
of
first time playing on 1200s to part of 800, on that Mendel stage.
what was the name of that crew?
I'm sorry, I didn't, the internet is so choppy. I didn't hear you.
What was the name of
The
your team?
Unpredictable Disco Corps. So, as
Oh,
you
okay.
know, there was so many groups back then.
Yeah, well, yes,
It was the Unpredictable Disco Corps.
Chicago is known for its cliques, and so we're not at all surprised that you were part of this impeccable uh, group of DJs. And there's a question that has been pending as you sort of opened it up. You said that the Mendel stage was the first place that you were exposed to or had the opportunity to spin on Technique SL 1200s. And so the question is, what's the
Yes.
difference of that technology versus
Well,
today's technology?
well, it's a huge difference. I was, prior to that, only playing on belt drive turntables, and just the technique and all of that is just totally different. It's almost like the difference between um, driving a Volkswagen versus a Ferrari. You know, um,
I love that comparison.
there's nuances to both, and both will get you from point A to point B. but the 1200s were definitely the professional choice for a reason. But you had to get used to it. That's a different ink that you used in playing on both of those turntables. So trust me, there were probably a few train wrecks that night.
And so furthering that comparison and contrast, the question is today's technology, the digital decks, that's a night and day different experience as well. Can you talk about what that um, is like for you, and do you ever go back to spinning vinyl, or are you strictly a digital DJ?
No, I'm definitely one of those believers in it's the talent, not the technology, that drives things. So if I'm presented with situation where I have to spend, if I have the vinyl available, it's the key, right? But with it available, I still have those skills. Those skills have not gone away. Um, at the same time, I tell a story after so many times of lugging records. I'm lugging two cases, and not a young man, but lugging two record cases through the airport, running track of fleet. Um, you know, I can remember that last time. I'm trying to catch my breath and flight and whole thing. It's like, why are you doing this? Get your CD cases and get this, and get it done.
I get it. I totally understand, and we are not young men. or young people anymore. So definitely lugging the equipment is not a desirable activity. But you know what, the sound quality, the ease of,
Not at all. Not at
yeah,
all. I thought
what's
I was
that?
gonna have a heart attack today.
Oh, no, it was grueling. I mean, it was a workout. You know, DJs were definitely pretty fit back in the day. So, can you, um, next talk about what was it that propelled you from DJing to then becoming a remixer producer, and what was one of those breakthrough projects for you?
I'm sorry. I think I missed the last part of your question.
Just asking if you could talk a little bit about the um, transition from DJ to remixer producer, getting behind the board.
Yeah, I'm some of the questions, all of it, but um, transition for me was definitely partially born of the education that I got from, you know, from DJing, learning song structure, getting a sense of what things are the key wise, that sort of thing. That not knowing that that's what I was learning, but in the process of learning the craft, those are kind of the things that I developed. And then I actually with the intention to be a radio producer. And shortly track for a radio producer, I realized, oh, that's not what I want to do. I don't want to be a radio producer. I want to be a record producer. And started the process, the education process at Columbia. But more than that, I got the experience from my peers, the inspiration from people currently who was making records. The influence that, as Marshall said, once Jesse pressed that record, everybody thought, oh, well, I could do that too, Um, and Chip E, when his record came out, just feeling like, oh, this is something that's achievable. And my first time in the studio, I believe, was with MQK2, Mark Belcher and Kelly. Um, and as they were making their first record for the International, just absorbed that experience. And from there, I was hooked. I wanted to just be in anybody's studio at any time that was doing anything remotely like that. And that kind of drove things. And then I was fortunate enough to have opportunities where people gave me a shot. Baldwin, Mike Hitman Wilson, um, who else? Candy J. Um, well, all people that were instrumental in just giving me a chance. Hudson, Beaudry from Frenchie's brother. All of those people, kind of allowed me to apply the knowledge that I was gaining at Columbia, and again, all of those DJ years, and apply it in the studio. And then my biggest advancement was early, just watching. He would let me hang out in the studio for hours, way out in Brookfield, where he was working by himself, so he probably was wanting the company, so to speak, because he in nowhere land, and just hanging out and learning the craft.
And there's a lot of conversation often about how insular or territorial the genre of house music can be for some. Clearly, your experience has been different because people embraced you. They brought you into the fold. can you talk a little bit about what that was like for you to be welcome, or did you find that there were some instances where people wanted to hide the records that they were playing or refused entry, for you into the studio, or did you have any of those negative experiences?
No, not at all. The more is that the community to be very helpful. I mean, when you think about it, sophomore high school, you know, um, those older guys let me get in the car. You know what I mean? When you think about that, starting there, um, you know, they let me get in the car, which was very helpful. Then I think about when we first started DJing Mendo, um, the the process of renting the equipment. Ken Samuels and Wall very helpful. I mean, obviously paying him, but he took us seriously enough to allow us to be his clients, so to speak. We were kids. I think about you know, ET and Hurley kind of welcome into their fold. We were kind of the B team during that time. So while Farley, and Hurley and Andre Hatchett and those guys were doing the larger parties during that time, we were doing all of the house parties, the parties that were actually in people's houses, in backyards and basements and all of that. And people don't speak about that, but that was a huge part of the house scene and culture. So we were working DJs at a young age, and camaraderie um, that we had, stretched over to Brett Morrison and those guys, and Timmy and Jerry McAllister and Kenny Baker and those guys, um, and all of the other people. And I can remember Ferris, going from Howdy with a 1200, saying, "Let me get on battle you on my 1200s." You know what I mean? So there's tons of interaction. And then when I got into making records, Farley was, very helpful and introduced me to people at New Music Conference and Rick Lenore. And I mean, go down the list. I can't think of any time that I felt like people were trying to block or trying, you know, not to hang with us. I remember Jesse Saunders speaking in on a MK2 session, telling them how to EQ the kick drum. That sometimes it's not about turning up the bass. It's about just turning up the volume of kick drum. He didn't have to do that. You know what I mean? It's just so many different points. It just was an opposite experience from some of the things that people speak about. Now I don't know if that was my nature that I attracted, that energy
Mm-hmm.
from people, or if it's just the energy of the community. I like to think it's the energy of the community that we are, generally more helpful than hurtful.
Well, thanks for sort of setting the record straight in terms of your experience. Certainly, we can't, um, deny the experience some others have had, but yours has certainly been one of being embraced by the community, and you did the same for others that came after you. There's a couple of comments, one that shouted out the ID Records
Absolutely.
days. We were talking about being out there in Brookfield, Illinois. Uh, that camp, as I used to call them, the ID Records camp, had so many dimensions. Great product, great remixes and production coming out of it. But there was a little bit of controversy. You guys did have, at one time, there was a perception that there was this very insular community of the ID Records crew, but a lot of people were in and out of there. I mean, I spent some time out in Brookfield as well, and developing press kits for many of the artists, yourself included, Shantae Savage, Jerry, and of course Steve. What were some of the stories that are highlights for you of the days at ID Records?
I think it was part opportunity and a part oppression. Is what that looked like. I mean, oh, overall, I would not change that experience for the world. I think that I learned so much about the business, about actual craft of making records. I mean, across the board. I came in sort of as an intern, and one of my first duties was going to pick up Jamie Principal and move him into the recording studio. Um,
Mm.
and I always tell the story, my expectation was that Jamie was in a castle and I was going to have to jump to get to him and he was going to be floating, like in midair or something, right? And yeah, Jamie was just in a regular Chicago bungalow on the south side of Chicago. and he came out and we loaded his stuff into my car. And Jamie said not one word to me the whole drive to Brookfield. and then I helped him move his stuff in. And, after a while, we actually became friends and
Yeah.
just, the family and the camaraderie and the creative energy between all of us in there. But yeah, and then there were times where it was about the oppression as well. We had a manager
Yeah.
who, had a few racist tendencies, a few old school mentalities, who didn't necessarily respect house music per se, did not have the respect for the music, especially did not have the respect for the underground. Um, so, there were plenty of limitations. I remember Cosgrove from Ministry of Sound calling me at home, um,
Okay.
because they wanted me to come over to play in London. And I had no idea, you know, that it was that type of interest in me or the music I was making, but that's how cultured we were. I'm huge over in London, if you will, quotations, do. Um, and I have no idea. And there's this super club that wants me, to come play. And again, I have no idea. And then when she asked me, I couldn't go, you know. And just when you think about that, how crazy it is, Um, but that was the climate um, at the production company, at the
And what
production
was the?
company.
I'm going to ask this question on behalf
And,
of
and, and there's tons of stories. I mean,
Lauren. Will typically ask this question. What year was that? What when was? What's the setting of this time frame you're describing? Is this the late '90s?
so it's a little so it's a little foggy to me. Well, I would say it was probably between the years of 1988 and 1993.
Okay.
Like I said, I started out as an intern, so some of that time I was just hanging out and painting walls. I wasn't actually producing, so I don't know if I can count that time. I wasn't producing for ID. I was producing, but I wasn't producing for ID. So I would say probably 89 to 93 was generally the run, which is almost like
And
college. Just 4 years of college, right? That's what I consider.
right, right. It was like a college education. And during that time, one of our listeners wants to know: did you ever work with Frankie Knuckles?
Not directly. Frankie was a huge help for me as well. When I was looking to leave ID and just really not knowing, because we were involved in the business side a little bit. Mostly our manager handled the business side, so I didn't know if there was work for me outside of ID because, generally we were made to feel like Steve company and they really want Steve, but if Steve's not available or they don't want to pay Steve's price, they can have you and Maurice
Hey,
Joshua. So when I was looking to leave and branch out on my own, I had a long conversation with Frankie on the phone, and Lee was assuring me that no, there's demand out that you need to leave. That that there's a soft landing for you. And then I was lucky to have one of the titans, so to speak, in the music industry, Craig Coleman, be one of the first to step up, Atlantic Records, to step up and say, yeah, we'll definitely, we can definitely get that work for you. And I didn't miss a beat. And later, I became a member of Def Mix Productions, which is a whole nother crazy story.
wow, I want to go back to the Craig Coleman era for a moment because he didn't initially have the Atlantic deal, right? He started with his independent Big Beat, and they got, or was that a custom imprint of Atlantic, or did Atlantic actually acquire his label? And where were you in um, that journey?
It's an interesting story. I think as a result of Steve's mix of "Got a Love for You," Jamanda, that helped catapult Craig into a joint venture type deal with Atlantic. And his father was already, I think, pretty plugged in the music business, so the relationship was there,
Yeah.
and he was able to parlay that into an executive position and still run his independent label under the Atlantic umbrella.
Yeah, that was always the sort of golden goose, right? Was to get the you know, your independent label um, to be picked up as a custom imprint and then being distributed by the bigs, as they used to be called, BMG, Warner Electra, Atlantic, um,
Yeah,
and, and some of the
you know,
others.
let's let's touch on that just a second. Unfortunately, that is definitely a Chicago thing, because we were always looking for the respect that the East Coast, West Coast had. Um, we sought to be sought after, I think, as opposed to down south, who, um, and I'm talking about hip hop, where they were willing to sell their records out of the trunk of their car. That's where Chicago house music started. Jesse tells the story all the time. Kurt tells the story. We sold those records outside, out of the trunk of our car. And I think that somewhere in the process of Tin City getting an album deal with Atlantic and JM Silk getting an album with RCA and Communicate, I forget the name of the group, getting a deal with Epic and Jesse's deal with Geffen. We bit onto the whole major label, um, the concept of we want to be, adored by the majors. And I think that had he had more of an independent run, that could have changed some of our trajectory as well. When you think about people like Master P and people like uh, forget the other
Luke,
guys, from New Orleans,
Luke,
Cash Money, um, owning ownership of your masters, right?
yeah,
Yeah, Luke, ownership of your masters. When you think about that concept and the battles that, like, artists like Maurice and Marshall Jefferson and Adonis and go down the list, who tracks records, controls them, their masters. Larry Sherman is long gone, but they don't control the music that they created. You know, I just think that if you imagine that trajectory, what if all of those Chicago producers and artists had more control over the music that they made over the years, like when it started?
well, you know, that's what we document here on Vintage House Show. Some of that retrospective. It's very interesting given that Chicago's rich history of the music business, you know, existing here, and some of the lessons learned during the earlier prior to house, and when rock and roll and R&B and some of those other genres, right? South Loop again, Record Row being the home to Chess Records, and the history of how artists were treated there. And while we didn't necessarily
Yeah.
repeat the same history, there were still mistakes that we couldn't get out of our own way for, and had to learn the hard way. And I think your
Well, you know,
story.
there's a huge racial component to this as well. There's a huge racial component to this as well. When you think about, you know, here is these figures, if you will, I would say even father figures to a certain extent, offering you $1,500 and you're an 18-year-old kid, right? Um, but in exchange for that $1,500, all of your rights be inside away, your publishing rights, your artist royalties, all of that. You're going to get an accounting. Just the drive of that, you know, it becomes, um, you know, almost like a drug dealer and an addict relationship. You get addicted to getting those advances,
Yes.
and not realizing that, you know, it may be turning a blind eye as well. That there's a whole bigger picture that you're not on to, and you know, it's predatory. It's, you know, taking advantage. You know, um,
And house music has not been the only
and it's no
genre.
coincidence that those figures were white and those
Yeah.
kids were black.
Yep. And house music has not been the only genre, or people from that genre have not been the only ones to fall victim to those predatory
Absolutely,
practices. And Jesse Saunders tuned in,
yes,
comments
absolutely.
that he and Marshall both own and control their masters, because they had great mentors who may have learned the hard
Well,
way
that, I mean,
earlier.
that is a great. I think that is a great victory for them. But for the most part, most of those tracks artists, most of those um, artists, you know, were not that fortunate to gain control of their masters.
Indeed. And so House was clearly, as you referred to it earlier, you know, you got a 4-year education during your time out at ID Records. You know, maybe some had the 2-year associate's degree, and some might have not benefited at all from having mentorship or learning. And so, you know, they found themselves simply ass out at the end of it all. But the um, genre advanced, it progressed, and to the point you also made earlier about community, people started to share that information, and in forming the various camps and collectives of artists and DJs and remixers and producers. I had the privilege of being part of the Mirage Entertainment camp. You cited Rick Lenore and Larry Thompson, Gary Jackmaster Wallace. Those guys had you know, people that helped them, and they became masters at the independent distribution game, as an example. And so you know, the education spread. You also talked about New Music Seminar. You talk a little bit about what your takeaways were from attending new music seminars and similar conferences like Winter Music Conference, and actually South by Southwest, before it became the big interactive conference, was a college and independent music conference.
again, I'm sorry because of the choppiness of the internet. I'm not quite sure. I'm trying to infer in between, what the comment is, but I think that during that time when Chicago formed that collective, those were good times. I mean, I think that, Georgie Porgy was a driver in that. Clubhouse with Hula was a driver in that. And I think all of us coming together as independent label, I just think that we had a lot of um, power in that unity, um, and I think that the world felt it as well. I think that distributors were a lot less willing to stiff people on their records because they knew they have to answer to the collective. I think that um, creatively, um, there was a vibe that you know masters at work and Definites and all of those New York respected entities respected us as well as a group and recognized that we were um, not only from a business standpoint driving things, but from a creative standpoint driving things. And the world really felt us during that time. Um, and, and those were good times.
Yeah, I call it the golden age of house music, if there is such a thing. Um, that was it, and um, we've really made inroads into.
During
Uh,
that time, I wish I wasn't so focused on remixing. It almost felt like those guys were allowed to go out and be underground at a time where underground had real value, and I felt like I had to go to work. So everybody else could go play, and I had to go to work, and that's what it felt like remixing for the major labels. Now, the money was definitely a benefit, but in retrospect, I wish I would have invested more of that money into the underground, into what was going on, and even my time as well. I wish I would have split my time better between the big money projects and the lesser paying underground projects because that is when you talk about legacy. That's where legacy comes. That's where culture movement comes from. Me doing a remix on some signed by Atlantic or Universal or whoever that the, the artist doesn't have much longevity. My remix doesn't have much longevity. I wish I would have invested that time more into um, to catalog that does have longevity, that does have legacy, and I mean from a cultural standpoint as well as a business standpoint.
can can you tell us about one of the remix projects though that you're most proud of, and that those in our audience may or may not know that you were involved in?
Man, it's been so many, and not to sound cliche, there's literally been so many. Oftentimes, people will talk to me about projects, and literally, I don't even remember doing them because that's how many, were coming through the door and going out the door. I think about my remix for Kim English. I know a place, love her voice. So just the opportunity to work with her.
Rest in
Um,
peace.
my Music Soul Child mix. Yeah, rest in peace, Kim. Um, my Music Soul Child remix is definitely one. The Michael Jackson, of course, because just remember the time. Michael's
One of
always
my
been
all-time faves.
an idol of mine, so to speak. Yeah, I mean, there's I mean, again, not to sound cliche, but there's just so many. I think um, I did a CNC Music Factory remix, and that was definitely um, one that it was a thing for me because, when you think about Hurley and CNC Music Factory and Morales and some of those guys, they were at the top of the food chain, so to speak. To have them back and ask me to remix one of their records, man, I'm trying to mimic their style and their influence for me. That was just a cool experience. Who else? Masters at Work, to have your peers, come to you and say, yeah, we want your creative vision on one of our records. Clearly, they don't need it. Their work stands alone. So to have those experiences, this is great.
That I mean, that's a powerful legacy. I hear you, and talking about building catalog.
Excuse me.
Certainly, where publishing comes in to play, and licensing. Um, I definitely understand your perspective there. Uh, Lady D talks about your Simply Red remix as one of the great memories. Thomas calling out work you've done with Kim Sims, and of course NXS. Latanza references your NXS mix. So you
Yeah,
definitely had
that was
golden touch.
In excess. Wow. That's you got a great resume,
yeah,
man. That's a stunning
that was a
resume.
very interesting time. that that was a whirlwind experience. So you know, I had gotten called by NXS management to do NX remix, and I'm sure some from the label had referred them or what have you, right? Um, and for whatever reason, Michael Hutchins just took to me, so I ended up um, going to New York to recut the vocals with Michael Hutchins, and they were doing a
Wow.
David Letterman show, and they needed a background singer, so I was able to bring on one of my artists as their background singer for the David Letterman show, and then after they did that show, he's up all night with me re-recording vocals and such. And then off of that excitement, he and I were going to do an album together because he really liked house music. So he was going to do a solo album, and I was going to produce that solo album. And then that led to them wanting me to record a song with them for the Beverly Hills Cop soundtrack, the third movie. And I had made up my mind, we could do the remake of Stevie Wonder, Living Just for the City. And then they wanted me to go on tour with them to DJ before they won this concert. I mean, it was just this whirlwind. And then, crazy enough, I don't know specifically what happened, but Brett Ratner, to this day, if I ever meet Brett Ratner, I have to tell him this story. He did not know Stevie Wonder living just for the city. Um, so he put the kibosh on that song, which then started the opposite effect. And all of a sudden, I wasn't going on tour with them. We weren't doing Michael Hutchins' solo album, and everything else in between. And it was the funniest thing. It was like this huge ramp up and this huge ramp down, and then they switched management. So I suspect there were some management issues going on, and when the new team came in, I got the boot, so to speak. But crazy opportunity, and Michael Hutchins was just I found to be a sweet guy. He was very nice. Another rest in peace.
Wow. This comment from Thomas says it all. Your career is legendary, and the impact you've had and the creativity. So kudos to you. Thank you for spending time with us here at Vintage House. There's so much more though left to your story. I mean, you've joined us to talk about the history of house in the South suburbs in the past. You, I believe, operated and managed a studio out there. So, of course, you're being a friend of the Vintage House Show. We'll have to have you back very soon. Any anything
Eighth
coming
man off
up?
the bench.
Yeah, you got projects in the hopper? Anything you want to share? How can people, continue to indulge in the magic of E-smoove? Talk to us a little bit about that as we close out tonight's show.
Yep. My apology for this internet connection. Unfortunately, that is not the quality we're looking for. The steady effect. We're looking for that.
We're blaming it on all the
Just
elementary
coming
school
projects is I
kids.
have a new. my my upcoming project is my new label, Super Fresh Recordings. We'll be releasing starting in probably end of October. But I'm looking forward to projects with Barbara Tucker, with Latanza Waters, of course, Michael White, um, uh, hopefully a Jocelyn Brown project. Julie McKnight is slated for release. So we got a lot of stuff coming down the pipeline.
That's exciting. Very exciting, and we're looking forward to hearing those projects, helping to support them, whether you're dropping them through the now traditional channels, TrackSource, Beatport, and all of the music retailers or Bandcamp, or however they're coming to us. Let us know. We'll help get the word out. Maybe if opportunity permits, we can get some time with you in the studio. We've done that before. We're happy to spend a few minutes and distract you from your creativity to talk more. But we want to ensure that yes, you forgot something.
I forgot something huge. I'm a new member of the New Bang Clan.
Congratulations on that.
Yeah, we saw that.
NBC.
That's fantastic.
So my alliance with I don't know how I can forget that. And just to be clear, my alliance with Clubhouse as a Clubhouse DJ as well. So
This
just
guy's
being able to be
holding.
included in another camp, I've been lucky to be part of the Subliminal camp over the years, the Mix camp, obviously ID camp, and now this latest thing, hooking up with the New Bang Clan. So
That's hot, and
I'm
it's new. So I'm
be
sure
banging new.
they
We
recognize.
need a show with all the New Bang Clan on. Maybe we can tape it just in case we have these, sort of internet and technology issues. We can tape it and then throw it on live later. But we would love to have the whole New Bang Clan on for a show and just talking about the evolution of it in the future.
Yep. So you got to make that happen. And so
I'm sorry, Lauren.
she's asking for a all New Bang Clan version of Vintage or episode of Vintage House. So
Whatever
you're kind
Lauren wants, Lauren gets. I don't know what
of
she
okay.
asked for, but
There it is, Lauren.
I may need to change my ask.
So this being a especially unique episode or edition of Vintage House Show, we often refer to when I get to host alongside Lauren and our co-host Lori Branch, I call this the Philosophical Grooves Edition, just because I can. And in that context, we always ask our guests a philosophical question. And you're not shy on social media, sir. So I'm sure you can spend a moment to contemplate this question, which I've picked specifically for you. Would the world be a better place if the caste systems that exist did not exist, if there was no such thing as a caste system anywhere in the world? Would the world be a better place or worse?
Let me see if I heard the question is if in the world is that the question?
Yes. How would the world be if there was no caste system? If classism and those kinds of constructs didn't exist at all, how would the world be?
I think, and this is probably going to go against popular opinion, to quote a um, semi-famous rich man, Willie Wilson. Everybody's shocked I'm quoting Willie Wilson. He once said, "You got to keep you a carrot. You got to keep you a carrot," and I think that was a simplistic way of saying you need um, the desire to the aspirational piece to move things forward. So I think that unfortunately, without a class system, you wouldn't have people wanting to do better and innovate and being driven by financial gain and such. And and if your neighbor is driving a Honda, you want to drive a Mercedes. I think that that is part of what drives the U.S. and other countries to um, just to innovate and create and all of that. So I think that the world would probably be a little bit off without a class system. Unfortunately, along with all of the evils that come with that come with um, just being materialism and all of that such. It drives you. I think that it's the same reason that you know maybe men wouldn't take a shower and wouldn't try to dress nice and smell nice or what have you if there wasn't the drive for um, women's approval, so to speak. I don't know if that's a direct correlation, but the point is that you got to keep your carrot, to quote Willie Wilson.
There you have it, ladies and gentlemen, a philosophical perspective from our guest tonight, the one and only Eric E-smoove Miller. We want to thank you for joining us on tonight's episode of the Vintage House Show. We've kept you a little longer because, again, the conversation's intriguing. Your story is so rich, and as many of the audience members have cited today, you're legendary, dude. Thanks for being on tonight's episode, and please encourage.
I'm just blessed.
Please encourage your community, right, to come on and spend some time with the Vintage House crew. We're here every Wednesday, an hour or more. It depends on whatever it takes to get the story captured, archived, as we will own this narrative that Chicago is the birthplace of house music. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is house. Thank you for tuning in. Your main man, Mega, for our co-host and founder, Lauren Lowery, and our special guest tonight, Eric E-smoove Miller. Good night. Thanks, E. Appreciate you, brother.